The air smelled of smoke and gunpowder, heavy enough to choke on. Clara Whitmore stumbled through the clearing, clutching her torn skirts with one hand and pressing the other against her side, where a fresh cut burned like fire. The raid had come just before dawn, when the settlement still slept. Horses thundered out of the dark. War cries split the morning stillness, and in moments the world she knew was torn apart. She had seen her father fall with a musket half loaded. She had seen the barn go up in flames, orange tongues licking the sky. The memory already felt dreamlike, but the sharp crack of rifles and the shrill screams of women pulled her back into brutal reality. Clara ran, feet bare, stumbling over rocks and roots, her breath ragged in her throat. The prairie had never felt so wide, so merciless. A sudden shadow loomed in front of her. She froze. The figure stood tall and motionless, framed against the rising sun. His skin gleamed bronze beneath streaks of paint, and his black hair, braided with feathers, spilled over broad shoulders. He gripped a spear tipped with stone that glinted wickedly in the light. An Apache. Her heart seized. She thought of all the stories whispered in town, how they took scalps, how they burned captives, how mercy was not a word they knew. She wanted to scream, but her throat had gone dry. She wanted to flee, but her legs felt rooted in place. The warrior's eyes met hers, dark and sharp as obsidian. He studied her, his chest rising and falling slowly, as if weighing her worth in a single heartbeat. Then, without a word, he lifted the spear high, preparing to strike. The world narrowed. Clara saw her end in the flash of stone. Panic ripped through her, wild and desperate. She did not think, she only spoke, words tumbling out in a hoarse cry that surprised even herself. "Don't kill me?" Her voice cracked, but she pressed on, half sobbing. "I can be a good wife." The words echoed in the clearing, reckless, absurd. She could hardly believe she had said them. Yet, in that instant, they were the only shield she had. The warrior froze. The spear hovered mid-air, the muscles in his arm taut. His gaze flicked over her again ragged dress, dirt-streaked face, wide frightened eyes. Something shifted in his expression, not softness exactly, but curiosity. Slowly, almost deliberately, he lowered the weapon until the stone tip rested against the ground. Clara's knees nearly buckled. She sucked in a breath, but did not move, afraid that even a twitch might change his mind. For a long moment, they stared at one another. His silence pressed down heavier than any threat. Then he spoke, his voice low and even, accented but clear. "You would live as wife to Apache?" Clara's lips trembled. She wanted to say no, to curse him, to cling to her old life. But her mind replayed the image of her father falling, her home burning. There was no life to return to. The only choice left was death, or whatever future this man offered. She swallowed hard, forcing the words through dry lips. Yes. The warrior's eyes narrowed as though testing the truth in her tone. He gave a short nod, sharp as a blade, then gestured with his spear for her to walk. Clara hesitated, her heart thundering in her chest. Behind her, smoke curled above the treetops. Ahead of her, the warrior's shadow stretched long and unyielding across the earth. With trembling steps, she followed in that brief exchange. A life had been spared not by weapon, not by mercy, but by a desperate promise. Clara did not yet know whether she had saved herself or doomed herself to a fate worse than death. But one thing was certain. Her words had bound her path to his and so began the story of the settler woman who begged for her life with the vow of becoming a wife, and the Apache warrior who lowered his weapon to hear her speak. The prairie gave way to rugged hills, their slopes dotted with juniper and mesquite. Clara's feet throbbed against the stony ground, but she forced herself onward, one unsteady step at a time. Every few paces, she glanced at the warrior who led her. His stride was long, unhurried, as if the raid and the burning settlement behind them had been nothing more than another day's duty. He did not look back, but she knew he was aware of her every movement if she slowed too much. His sharp gesture with the spear pushed her forward again. The silence between them gnawed at her. Fear pressed in, but so did questions. Why had he spared her? Why take her captive when he could have ended her life with a single thrust? The words she had shouted still echoed in her mind, "I can be a good wife." They had been born of panic, but now they felt like shackles binding her to an unknown fate. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of red, the warrior led her into a canyon where smoke curled from small fires and voices rose in a language she did not know. Clara's heart pounded as they entered the Apache camp. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, men, women, children. Their gazes held no warmth. Some were curious, others openly hostile. She felt her cheeks burn, her torn dress clinging to her like a badge of shame. The warrior stopped at the center of the camp. He struck the butt of his spear against the earth, drawing the attention of the elders gathered around a fire. Words were exchanged, sharp, clipped phrases in their tongue. Clara could not understand, but she recognized the weight in their tones. The warrior gestured toward her, then laid his hand over his chest. Her breath caught. He was claiming her. The elders murmured among themselves. One older man, his hair streaked white, scowled at Clara as though she were a snake brought into their midst. Another woman laughed harshly, shaking her head. To them, she was no prize, she was a burden, a mouth to feed, a reminder of the enemy. Clara's fear deepened. What if they refused her? What if they decided she was of no use after all? The warrior might lower his spear again, this time not in mercy. Summoning what little courage she had left, Clara lifted her chin and spoke, though her voice trembled. "I can work. I can help." She mimed grinding corn, carrying water, sewing. Her hands moved clumsily, but her meaning was clear. The elders fell silent, considering. One of the women, younger than the rest but with stern eyes, stepped forward. She jabbed a finger toward Clara, speaking a few harsh words. The warrior responded, his voice firm, protective even. The woman snorted and turned away, but the tension in the circle eased slightly. At last, the white-haired elder gave a short nod. The warrior inclined his head in return, and with that, the decision was made. Clara would live, but not as herself. She was no longer Clara Whitmore, daughter of a settler family. She was property, a captive, claimed as a prize of war. The warrior turned to her then, meeting her eyes for the first time since he had lowered his weapon. His expression was unreadable, but there was no cruelty in it. Only certainty, like a man who had made a choice and would not waver from it. He touched his chest and said a single word, "Dakota." Clara blinked. Was it his name? A test? She swallowed and whispered it back, clumsy on her tongue. Dakota. Something flickered in his eyes, approval, perhaps, or amusement. Then he gestured toward a small shelter of hides near the edge of camp. She understood. It was hers now, or rather, as she stepped inside, the weight of the day crashed over her. She sank to the ground, drawing her knees to her chest. She was alive, but her future was a fog she could not see through. She had bargained for survival with a promise she did not understand. Outside, she heard the murmur of voices, the crackle of fire, the steady beat of drums. Inside, her heart thudded with equal parts dread and disbelief. She had not been killed. She had been claimed. The next morning came too soon. Clara woke stiff and sore on a bed of woven mats inside the hide shelter. The air smelled of smoke, leather, and dust. For a moment, she thought it might all have been a nightmare, that she might hear her mother's voice or her father's footsteps outside. But when she pushed aside the flap, the truth struck her like a hammer. The camp was alive with movement. Women bent over clay pots, stirring maize into bubbling stews. Children darted between the shelters, chasing one another with shrill laughter. Men sat sharpening weapons or tending horses. The sun burned bright on the canyon walls, and the whole place seemed to hum with a rhythm foreign to her own. And then came the eyes. Everywhere she looked, someone was watching. A woman with strong arms and sharp cheekbones eyed her as though she were a stray dog. Children stopped mid-gain to gape at her pale skin and torn dress. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to shrink back inside the shelter, to vanish. But Dakota appeared, tall and unyielding, and gestured for her to follow. He led her to the edge of the camp where a stream ran shallow and fast over smooth stones. Without speaking, he set down a clay jar and pointed. Clara hesitated. The jar was nearly as big as her torso. He wanted her to carry it? Aye. She started, then stopped when he gave her a hard look. The kind of look that said refusal was not an option. With trembling arms, she lowered the jar into the water. It filled slowly, growing heavier until she could barely lift it. Her muscles screamed, her back bowed, but she staggered up the bank and shuffled a few steps before collapsing in the dirt. Water sloshed out across her lap. Laughter erupted nearby. A pair of women had been watching, one covering her mouth with her hand while the other pointed outright. Clara's face burned hot with shame. She wanted to shout at them, to remind them she hadn't chosen this life. But the words died on her tongue. Dakota's shadow fell over her. He said nothing, only crouched and showed her how to lift the jar with her knees, how to balance it against her hip instead of trying to clutch it like a child's toy. She watched closely, biting her lip, then tried again. This time, though still awkward, she managed a few more steps before setting the jar down. Dakota gave a curt nod. Approval. That was all. And yet it sparked a strange warmth inside her chest, faint, but real. The day continued in that fashion. Clara was shown how to grind maize on a stone slab until her arms ached, how to gather firewood from the scrubby mesquite, how to stitch torn hides with sinew instead of thread. Each task left her clumsy, fumbling, and painfully aware of every mocking glance from those around her. More than once she thought of running, but each time her eyes found the canyon walls steep, jagged, and endless. Even if she escaped, where would she go? Her home was gone. That night, as the tribe gathered around a fire to share food, Clara sat apart. A wooden bowl was thrust into her hands, steaming with stew. Hunger gnawed at her, but she hesitated before taking a sip, half afraid it might be poisoned or laced with some trick. Still, her body overruled her mind, and she ate. Children giggled nearby, whispering words she couldn't understand. One little girl edged closer, her black braids swinging, and poked at Clara's pale arm as though testing whether it was real. Clara gave a weak smile. The girl giggled again and darted back to her mother's side. For the first time, Clara felt something other than fear. Something like belonging? No, not yet. But possibility. When Dakota returned to the shelter later, he did not touch her. He simply laid down on his mat across from hers, his breathing slow and steady. Clara lay awake, staring at the roof of hides and branches. The weight of the day pressed on her like stones. She was learning awkwardly, painfully to survive here, to be useful, to be more than a burden. But deep inside she clung to a single truth. Every stroke of the grinding stone, every drop of water hauled, every bite of strange food swallowed was not just survival. It was the first step in fulfilling the desperate bargain she had made. She had promised she could be a good wife. Now she had to prove it. Days turned into weeks, each one blurring into the next, and Clara began to notice things about Dakota she had not seen in those first terrifying hours. He was not a man of many words, but his presence spoke volumes. When he walked through camp, others stepped aside with respect. When he spoke in the council of men, even the elders listened. He carried himself like one who bore not just strength but responsibility, Still, he was never unkind to her. Demanding, yes, expecting her to keep pace when she lagged, to try again when she failed, to carry her share of work. But unlike the sidelong glances and mocking words from others, his treatment of her was steady, measured. She could almost believe he meant to shape her into something more than a captive. That truth revealed itself one afternoon, when Clara bent over the river with other women, scrubbing hides against stones. She was awkward at it, her arms clumsy, her grip too soft. Laughter rose from her companions at every mistake. She ignored them as best she could until a sharp sting cracked across her shoulder, a whip of wet hide flung by one of the women. Clara gasped, nearly toppling into the water, as the others burst into cruel laughter. The sting was less painful than the humiliation. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She clenched her jaw, forcing her hands to keep scrubbing. That was when Dakota's shadow fell across them. The women's laughter died instantly. He spoke, his voice low but edged like steel. Clara did not understand the words, but she understood their weight. The women lowered their gazes, murmured apologies, and retreated. Dakota crouched beside Clara. His dark eyes flicked to the welt rising on her shoulder. For a moment she thought he might reach out, but instead he only gave a single, deliberate nod as if to say you endured, and that is strength, no comfort. No softness, but something far better respect. That night, Clara watched as Dakota joined a hunting party returning with deer. He helped carry the carcass, his muscles straining with the weight, yet he bore it without complaint. Later, he offered her a portion of the meat, not tossing it at her feet like a master to a servant, but handing it to her directly. She met his eyes, murmured a quiet, "Thank you," and for the first time, he gave the faintest hint of a smile. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it came, but it lodged in her heart. The next test came when a group of younger warriors cornered her near the edge of camp. Their laughter was sharp, their words taunting, and though she could not understand them, the intent in their eyes chilled her. One reached for her arm, his grip rough. Before she could cry out, Dakota was there. He moved with the swiftness of a striking hawk, seizing the younger warrior by the wrist and twisting until the man yelped in pain. He barked a command, and the others scattered like children caught misbehaving. Dakota released the youth with a shove, then turned to Clara. His gaze held no pity, no apology, only an unspoken vow. While I draw breath, no harm will come to you. Clara's chest tightened. She had thought of him only as her captor, the man who held her life in his hands. But now she began to see something more. He was a shield as much as a chain. A warrior not only of war, but of honor. That night, lying on her mat, she replayed the day in her mind. The sting of the hide, the laughter, the fear of those young men, and the way Dakota had stood against them all. She realized something startling. She did not feel entirely alone anymore. For the first time since the raid, safety had a face. And it was his. Autumn crept slowly into the canyon, brushing the hillsides with gold. The nights grew cooler and the fires in camp burned longer. Clara had learned enough of the rhythms of life to move without constant fumbling. She could carry water without spilling, grind maize without bruising her hands raw, even sew simple seams into hides. She still drew stares, but fewer sneers. Her hands had toughened, her back had straightened, and though she felt weary at day's end, she no longer felt quite so breakable. And through it all, Dakota watched. Not with the idle curiosity of the others, but with the quiet patience of a man measuring her progress. One evening, after the tribe had eaten and the children had tumbled off to their shelters, Dakota sat apart from the fire, sharpening his knife against a stone. Clara lingered nearby, cradling a bowl of broth. She told herself she only sat close because the fire was warmest here, but the truth was harder to deny. His presence steadied her. After a long silence, she dared to speak. Dakota. His head lifted slightly, eyes narrowing in acknowledgement. She pointed to herself. Clara. Then, uncertain, she pressed her palm to her chest again. Clara. For the first time, he repeated her name. Slowly, carefully. Sulla Ra. A laugh bubbled out of her before she could stop it. The sound startled her. It had been so long since laughter had risen from her lips without fear. Dakota did not laugh, but his eyes softened, and he nodded once, as if pleased to have named her properly. Encouraged, Clara tried more. She pointed toward the fire. Fire. Dakota tilted his head, then answered, Koana. She repeated it, fumbling, and he corrected her softly, shaping the word again until she got close enough. She pointed to the sky. Sky. He followed her gesture. Yasin. They traded words until her tongue felt heavy, her mind foggy with the effort. But when she curled beneath her blanket that night, she whispered the words to herself, Koana, Yasin. A strange pride filled her. She was learning more than survival. She was learning him. In the days that followed, their exchanges grew. Dakota showed her how to weave reeds into simple mats, his large hands surprisingly deft. She tried, fingers clumsy, earning a quiet grunt of amusement from him. She showed him how her mother had once stitched flour sacks into aprons, and though he did not understand all her words, he seemed to grasp the meaning, nodding thoughtfully. One afternoon, Clara gathered the courage to share something deeper. As they sat near the stream, she traced a shape in the dirt, a square house with a peaked roof. She tapped her chest, then the house. Home. Dakota studied the drawing, then drew beside it figures on horseback, a tipi beneath the sun. He tapped his chest. Dakota. She pointed to the tipi, then to him. Home. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw a shadow pass across his face. A heaviness. He murmured something in Apache, the tone low, sorrowful. Clara did not understand the words, but she felt them. Loss. She felt her throat tighten. Quietly, she drew a smaller shape beside the house, two stick figures holding hands. She tapped the taller one. Father. Then the smaller. Clara. She drew a line through the man and lowered her head. Dakota's gaze lingered on her drawing. Slowly, he extended his hand and brushed the line away, as if to say death does not erase him. Clara's chest ached, but not with despair. With recognition. For the first time, she felt he truly saw her pain, and she glimpsed his. That night, as drums beat and voices rose in song, Clara sat close to Dakota, their shoulders nearly touching. He did not speak, nor did she. Yet the silence between them was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with something unspoken, fragile, and new. Not love. Not yet. But the first stirrings of it. The warning came at dawn, carried on the pounding of hooves and the sharp cry of a scout. Clara was grinding maize when the sound pierced the camp. Heads snapped up. Warriors leapt to their feet, bows snatched, spears lifted. The air thickened with urgency. Clara's heart seized. She knew that sound danger, but not from settlers this time. From others. Dakota appeared suddenly at her side, his hand firm on her shoulder. Stay, he ordered, his eyes locked on hers. His voice was calm but edged with command. Then he was gone, striding toward the edge of camp where warriors gathered. Clara's body trembled. Every instinct screamed to obey, to crouch inside the shelter and wait it out. But the memory of the raid that had destroyed her home burned in her mind, the flames, the screams, her father's fall. She could not cower. Not again. Through the canyon walls came the echo of war cries, different from those of Dakota's people. A rival band. The clash was swift, sudden. Arrows sliced the air, spears thrust, and the canyon became a storm of chaos. Clara ducked behind a shelter, her breath ragged. Then she saw them, two children huddled near the stream, frozen in fear as a rival warrior bore down on them. Their mother screamed, but she was pinned in the fray, unable to reach them. Clara's blood turned to fire. Before she knew what she was doing, she sprinted toward the children. Her hands found a fallen branch, heavy and jagged. She swung it wildly, slamming it against the warrior's arm. He snarled, startled by her attack. She shouted, shoving the children toward the shelter. "Go! Run!" The warrior's eyes darkened with rage. He raised his blade. Clara's heart thundered. This was the end. But then Dakota was there, fast as lightning. His spear flashed, and the rival fell, lifeless in the dirt. Dakota whirled to Clara, fury blazing in his eyes. For a moment she thought he would scold her, drag her back in disgrace. Instead, he seized her shoulders and shook her, once not gently, but not cruelly either. His words poured out sharp and fast, and though she could not understand, the meaning was clear: foolish, brave, dangerous, strong. Clara's knees nearly gave out. The branch still clenched in her hands. She glanced toward the children, now safely in their mother's arms. Relief flooded her, stronger than fear. The battle raged on until the rival band, outmatched, fled into the hills. The Apache camp stood battered but unbroken. Smoke curled from trampled fires, the cries of the wounded echoing through the canyon. Clara stumbled among them, helping carry water, pressing cloth against bleeding wounds. Her hands shook, but she did not stop. When night fell, the survivors gathered around the fire to honor their victory. The warriors recounted their kills, their voices fierce and proud. Then, to Clara's astonishment, one of the elders rose and pointed toward her. A murmur rippled through the circle. Some faces held surprise, others doubt. But then the children she had saved ran forward, clutching her hands. Their mother bowed her head in gratitude, tears shining in her eyes. Dakota stepped forward. He placed his spear in the ground, his voice ringing out. Clara understood none of the words, yet she felt them in her bones. He was telling them what she had done, that she had faced a warrior, not as a victim, but as one of them. The murmurs turned to nods, then to cheers. A drumbeat began, deep and steady, and the tribe sang a song of survival. Clara sat among them, trembling with exhaustion, but a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time since she had arrived, she was not merely enduring. She was part of something greater. That night, as she lay in the shelter, Dakota sat across from her, watching the firelight flicker over her face. He did not speak, but his eyes held something new. Not just the gaze of a captor, not just of a protector. It was the gaze of a man who had seen her courage and could no longer deny her place beside him. And Clara, staring back through the crackle of fire, felt the truth settle deep in her bones. She was no longer surviving on borrowed words. She was becoming exactly what she had promised a good wife. The world shifted again the morning the soldiers came. Clara heard them before she saw them, the rhythmic clatter of hooves, the metallic jingle of bridles, the barked commands in English. Her breath caught at the sound of her mother tongue. For so long she had lived wrapped in the cadence of Apache words, gestures, and silences that the sudden familiarity struck her like a blow. The riders appeared over the ridge, a line of blue coats gleaming in the sun. Rifles rested across their saddles, sabers flashing at their sides. Clara's heart lurched. These were her people. They were here to rescue her. Around her, the Apache camp bristled with tension. Warriors leapt to arms, Dakota at their head, his jaw tight, his spear steady. The soldiers halted a short distance away, their captain raising a hand in truce. His eyes found Clara instantly. "Miss," he called, "you're safe now. Come here. We'll take you home." The words struck deep. Home. The sound of it nearly undid her. For a moment she imagined herself stepping forward, falling into their protection, leaving behind the smoke and hardship of the canyon. She saw herself clothed once more in calico, sitting in a church pew, walking streets where people spoke her name without stumbling. But then the image faltered. Her father was gone. Her family buried in ashes. The town she had once known would not welcome her with open arms. Whispers would follow her. She lived among them. She shared their fire. She was one of them now. Beside her, Dakota stood silent, watching her with unreadable eyes. He did not plead, did not command. He only waited. The choice was hers, and he would not strip it from her. Clara's pulse pounded in her ears. She looked at the soldiers, at their clean uniforms, their polished boots, their promises of safety. Then she looked at the Apache camp, at the women who had begrudgingly begun to accept her, at the children she had saved, at the place where she had ground corn until her arms ached and carried water until her back bent, at Dakota, who had lowered his weapon when he could have ended her life, who had shielded her, taught her, respected her. One life was familiar, but it no longer belonged to her. The other was strange, but it was hers now. She had earned it with every breath. The captain called again, impatience creeping into his voice. "Miss, come along." "Quickly." Clara stepped forward, her legs trembling. She saw relief flash across the soldiers' faces. But she stopped halfway. Slowly, she turned. Her eyes found Dakota's. His face remained calm, but his hands tightened around his spear. For a heartbeat, no one moved, no one breathed. Then Clara spoke, her voice clear though it shook. "No." The word cut the air like a blade. Gasps rose from the soldiers. One of them cursed under his breath. The captain's face hardened, disbelief twisting his mouth. "Miss, you don't understand. You've been taken against your will. You don't belong with them." Clara lifted her chin. "I do." The words surprised even her, but once spoken they felt solid, immovable. She glanced at Dakota, at the canyon that had become her prison and her refuge both. "This is my place now." The captain spurred his horse forward, but Dakota stepped into his path, his spear lowered, his eyes unyielding. For a long, tense moment, the two men stared at one another, the blue-coated soldier and the painted warrior, two worlds colliding. Finally, the captain pulled his reins, fury flashing in his eyes. He spat into the dirt. "So be it. But remember, you chose this." He wheeled his horse, barked orders, and the soldiers rode away in a cloud of dust. Silence settled over the canyon. Clara's knees felt weak, but she did not fall. Dakota looked at her, his expression still unreadable. Then, slowly, he placed his hand over his chest and gave a single nod. In that gesture, Clara understood. She was no longer captive, no longer bargaining for survival. She was here by her own will. She had chosen him. The dust of the soldier's departure lingered in the air, curling like smoke against the canyon walls. Clara stood rooted in place, her pulse still racing, her choice ringing in her ears. No. She had spoken it aloud, and in that word, she had severed the last tie to the world she once knew. The camp remained silent for a long while. The Apache warriors watched her, their gazes cautious, measuring. The women whispered among themselves. Some still frowned, but others nodded slowly, as if a line had been crossed and there was no going back. Dakota moved toward her, each step deliberate. He stopped in front of her, towering but steady, his dark eyes searching hers. He did not smile, did not speak, yet something unspoken passed between them. A question. A vow. Clara swallowed, her throat tight. For so long she had clung to survival by desperation, bargaining with words she had hardly understood. "I can be a good wife." Now here, standing before him, she realized those words had grown into truth. Not forced, not stolen, but chosen. She lifted her hand, hesitant, and laid it over his chest where his heart beat strong beneath her palm. "Dakota," she whispered. Then, more firmly, "Husband." A ripple of voices stirred through the onlookers. Some gasped, some murmured approval, others merely watched. Dakota's jaw tightened, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw emotion flicker raw across his face: pride, relief, perhaps even wonder. He placed his own hand over hers, pressing it to his chest, and spoke a single word: "Wife." The declaration was not shouted. It did not need to be. It rang with finality, like the steady beat of a drum. The elder with streaked white hair stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as if testing her resolve. After a long moment, he gave a slow nod. He raised his staff and spoke words in Apache that Clara could not follow, but she understood the meaning: acknowledgement, acceptance. The women came forward, placing a woven blanket around her shoulders. It smelled of smoke and sage. One of them pressed a string of beads into her hands. The children she had saved tugged at her dress, smiling shyly. Clara blinked back tears. That evening, the camp celebrated not only victory over their rivals, but survival, renewal. Drums throbbed against the canyon walls, voices lifted in song. Firelight danced across painted faces and flickering shadows. Clara sat beside Dakota, the blanket still around her shoulders, the beads warm in her palm. For the first time, she did not feel like a prisoner at their fire. She felt like she belonged there. Takode did not speak often, but when he did, it was to teach her more of his language, pointing to the flames, the stars, the earth. Clara repeated each word, her tongue stumbling, her voice uncertain, until laughter bubbled from her lips. Dakota's eyes softened at the sound, and though he did not laugh, his gaze held warmth. Later, when the fire burned low and the songs faded into the night, Clara sat quietly, staring at the sky. The stars blazed sharp and endless above her. Once they had felt cold, unreachable. Tonight they seemed to watch with silent approval. She thought of the settlement that had burned, of the father she had lost, of the soldiers who had offered her freedom. That life was gone. In its place was this: the canyon, the people, the man who had spared her when he could have slain her. Her bargain had begun as a desperate cry: "Don't kill me. I can be a good wife." But now it was more than a plea. It was a promise fulfilled. She turned to Dakota. He sat across from her, sharpening his blade, the firelight casting his face in bronze and shadow. She studied him, the strength of his jaw, the steadiness of his hands, the calm gravity in his eyes. A warrior, yes. Fierce, unyielding. But also her protector. Her partner, her husband. Clara lay down that night not as a captive, not as a woman clinging to life by chance, but as a wife who had chosen her path. Her heart no longer beat with fear. It beat with something stronger, steadier. Belonging. Love. And so, in the silence of the canyon, with firelight flickering low and the stars blazing above, the settler woman who once begged for her life became what she had promised to be, by desperation first, but by choice at last a good wife,